This is Albert, and welcome back to In Response EDH. We're glad you can join us. On today's episode, we have our friend Jeff piloting Kozilek, the Great Distortion. This is the colorless Eldrazi deck I built for my daughter Alana. Jeff decides to keep an opening hand consisting of Ancient Tomb, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, Skyclave Relic, Expedition Map, Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, Titan's Presence, and a Throne of Makindi. Jose is playing his Akim the Soaring Wind tokens deck. He keeps an opening hand of a Clifftop Retreat, Impact Tremors, Marble Diamond, a Plains, Krenko Mob Boss, Arcane Signet, and an Aben Wind Guide. I'm up next, and I'm playing my personal favorite, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. I keep an opening hand of an Ancient Tomb, Ingarrick's Wake, Temple of Deceit, Snow-Covered Island, Brainstorm, Commander Sphere, and a Snow-Covered Plains. Last but not least, we have my good friend Matt. He's playing Samut, Voice of Dissent. He keeps an opening hand of a Sensei's Divining Top, Arid Mesa, Sun Petal Grove, Wood Elves, Norwood Priestess, and 2 Plains. With the introductions now complete, let's start the game. Jeff wins the die roll and gets to go first. Jeff starts the game off by playing an Ancient Tomb. He taps it, taking 2 life, to play an Expedition Map. Jose follows that up by playing a Plains, tapping it for a Soul Ring, tapping the Soul Ring for 2 mana to play a Marble Diamond. I play a tap Temple of Deceit as my first land, scrying 1 and putting that card to the bottom. Matt drops a Plains, taps it, and plays a Sensei's Divining Top. Jeff plays a Shrine of the Forsaken Gods as his land for turn. He taps it to play a Mana Vault. He then passes the turn to Jose. Jose plays a Clifftop Retreat as his land for turn. He taps the Soul Ring for 2 mana to play an Arcane Signet. He taps the remaining 4 mana to cast his Krenko Mob Boss. With nothing else, he ends his turn. I play an Ancient Tomb as my land drop. Tap 3 mana to bring out Commander Sphere, taking 2 damage from the Ancient Tomb. Matt plays an Arid Mesa as his land for turn, and passes. On his end step, Jeff taps his Ancient Tomb, dealing 2 damage to himself, to crack the Expedition Map. He searches up a Temple of the False God to his hand. Jeff untaps, draws a card, and plays the Temple of the False God as his land. He pays 6 mana to play a kicked Skyclave Relic, which will come in with 2 copies of itself. He also takes 2 damage from the Ancient Tomb. Jose starts his turn off by playing an Evolving Wilds. He then taps 2 mana to play an Impact Tremors, which will deal 1 damage to each opponent anytime Jose has a creature enter the battlefield. Jose then taps Krenko to create a 1/1 Goblin token. As the Goblin enters the battlefield, each opponent will lose 1 life. I untap, draw a card. I put down a Snow-Covered Plains as my land. I tap 5 mana, paying 2 life for the Ancient Tomb, to cast my commander, Yennet, Cryptic Sovereign. On my end step, Matt pays 1 to use the Sensei's Divining Top, allowing him to look at the top 3 cards and rearrange them. Matt draws a card. He pays 1 life to crack the Arid Mesa, searching up a Stomping Grounds to the battlefield. It comes in untapped, dealing 2 damage to Matt. He then plays a Sun Petal Grove as his land for turn, taps 3 mana to play a Wood Elves, which allows him to search up a forest card from his library.
Could have Savannah. I forget. I forget he has duels in this deck, and I just socked myself.
Jeff starts turn 4 by taking 1 damage from his mana vault. He then plays a Seagate Wreckage as his land drop. He taps 3 mana to play Titan's Presence, revealing Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger, to exile Jose's Krenko. He then taps 4 mana, taking 2 damage from the Ancient Tomb, to untap the mana vault. We later remind Jeff that you can only untap the mana vault on your upkeep, but we let it slide. With nothing else, he passes the turn to Jose. Jose untaps, draws a card, and plays an untapped Sulphur Falls as his land for turn. He then taps 5 mana to bring out his commander, Akim, the Soaring Wind. As Akim enters, each opponent will take 1 damage from the impact tremors. Jose then moves into combat and swings at Jeff with his 1/1 Goblin token. Jeff has no blockers, so he takes it. Jose then passes the turn to me. I play a Morphic Pool as my land for turn. Tap 1 blue mana to play a Brainstorm. This allows me to draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from my hand back on top of my library. I move to combat and choose to swing my commander at Jose, seeing as he's still at 40 life. When Yennet attacks, I reveal the top card of my library and get to cast it for free if it's an odd CMC. I reveal Ingaruk's Wake, which is what I put on top with the Brainstorm. This destroys all creatures and planeswalkers I don't control. On my end step, Matt pays 1 to activate Sensei's Divining Top. Matt untaps and drops a Plains as his land for turn. He taps 3 mana for a Chromatic Lantern. He then taps the Chromatic Lantern and his remaining 2 lands to play a Cultivate, choosing to search up a forest to the battlefield tapped and a mountain to his hand. Jeff plays a Throne of Makindi as his land for turn, and I let him know it's not in there for any synergistic purposes, it's just a pretty foil. Jeff then taps 10 mana, taking 2 off the Ancient Tomb, to play Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger. As Ulamog is cast, Jeff has some decisions to make.
What permanents do I not like that are on the field?
I'd recommend Albert's Commander.
I'd recommend Impact Tremors personally.
That's as long as you take Albert's Commander also, I'm fine with that.
With that being said, Jeff exiles my commander and Impact Tremors. He ends his turn after that. Jose untaps and plays an Addercar Waste as his land for turn. He taps 4 mana to cast an Aven Wind Guide, which seems amazing in a tokens deck. With nothing else, he ships the turn to me. On Jose's end step, I sacrifice my Commander Sphere to draw a card. I untap, draw a card, and play a Temple of the False God as my land for turn. I tap the Temple for 2 mana to cast Lightning Greaves. Matt untaps, and on his upkeep, pays 1 mana to use the Sensei's Divining Top to look at the top 3 cards. I pass the turn to Matt after that. Matt then draws a card and plays Clifftop Retreat as his land. Matt leaves all his mana up and decides to pass the turn to Jeff. He decides to pay 4 mana to untap the mana vault. He then pays 10 mana to cast his commander, Kozilek, the Great Distortion. This allows Jeff to refill his hand, drawing 4 cards. At this point, Jeff made a remark about wanting to be fair and spread the love evenly amongst the table.
Nothing fair. There's nothing fair about this. There's nothing fair about this at all.
Okay, well, alright, that's fine. Okay, so since I already hit Jose and Albert, I'm gonna hit you.
Ulamog's attack trigger causes Matt to exile the top 20 cards of his library. Before the damage resolves, Matt pays 1 mana to use Sensei's Divining Top, searching for an answer on the top of his library. He doesn't find one and loses 10 life. While Jose takes his turn, we get to see some of the goodies that were exiled from Matt's deck. Jose taps 7 this time to cast his commander, Akim, for the second time. He then taps his remaining 2 mana to cast a Boros Signet. He then drops his land for turn, a Glacial Chasm. As Glacial Chasm enters the battlefield, he sacrifices a Plains and passes to me. I drop an Exotic Orchard as my land. I tap 7 mana and look at Jeff to see if my commander resolves. It doesn't get countered, and I move to equip the Lightning Greaves. I go to combat and swing my commander at Jeff. Yennet's ability will trigger. Unfortunately, I reveal a land off the top. On my end step, Matt flashes in Samut, Voice of Dissent. And again pays 1 mana to use a Sensei's Top. Matt untaps, draws a card, and plays a mountain as his land for turn. He taps 3 mana for a Sword of Feast and Famine. He looks at Jeff to see if it resolves. Jeff can't counter it. He taps 2 mana to equip Samut with a Sword of Feast and Famine. Matt moves into combat and attacks me. I elect not to block and take 10 commander damage. The Sword of Feast and Famine will also let Matt untap all his lands and have me discard a card. Matt untaps all his lands, pays 2 mana for a Sylvan Library. He then pays 1 more mana to activate the top. Before he ends his turn, he casts a Norwood Priestess. On Jeff's upkeep, he takes 1 damage for the Mana Vault. He then pays 3 mana to cast a Whisper Silk Cloak. He pays the 2 mana to equip Whisper Silk Cloak to Ulamog. This gives Ulamog Shroud and Unblockable. As Jeff heads into combat, I make a quick suggestion.
Mill Matt, he says. If I get 1 more Mill Matt, I'm going to do it.
Mill Matt.
Alright.
Don't mill Matt.
We're milling Matt.
With that said, Jeff sends Ulamog at Matt, and he sends his commander Kozilek at me. I can't block Kozilek, so I take 12 damage, while Matt exiles the top 20 cards again. Jeff ends his turn by playing a Bonder's Enclave as his land drop. Jose untaps his land and pays the upkeep cost for his Glacial Chasm, taking 2 life. He He plays a Sunhome Fortress of the Legion as his land for turn. With nothing else, he passes the turn to me. I untap, draw a card, and play a snow-covered island as my land drop. I move to combat and attack Jeff for 3 more commander damage. Yennet's ability will trigger one more time, revealing an Aminatu the Fate Shifter, which I get to cast for free. I tap all my mana, taking 2 from the Ancient Tomb, to cast Mnemonic Deluge, hoping to copy Ingaruk's Wake in my graveyard. Unfortunately, it's met with a Warping Whale, and Jeff chooses the mode Counter Target Sorcery Spell. I uptick Aminatu to draw a card and put a card back on top. On my end step again, we see Matt using the Sensei's Divining Top to look at the top 3 cards. Matt untaps and draws 3 cards off the Sylvan Library. But chooses only to keep one of the 3 cards. He then taps 7 mana to cast Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. He moves into combat, choosing to attack Jeff with Samut and myself with Gisela. I block the angel with my commander. Jeff has no answers and no blockers and takes the 20 damage, which knocks him out of the game. The Sword of Feast and Famine allows Matt to untap all his lands on his second main phase. He then taps 1 more mana to use Sensei's Divining Top, and passes the turn. Turn 8 starts with Jose losing 4 life to keep the Glacial Chasms in play. He casts an Altar of Dementia and passes the turn to me. I untap, draw a card, uptick Aminatu again, drawing a card and putting a card back on top. I tap out and cast Emrakul for 9, since I have 4 card types in my graveyard. I move to equip the Lightning Greaves onto Emrakul, but in response, Matt pays 1 to look at the top 3 cards with the Sensei's Divining Top. He doesn't find an answer, so I move to equip the Lightning Greaves onto Emrakul. This is where I punt the game for myself. After some deliberation, I decide to help Jose try to win the game by taking control of Matt's next turn. I start Matt's turn off by drawing a card, and being reminded by Matt that he had a Sylvan Library on the battlefield. I decide to draw 3 cards and keep all 3, paying 8 life. I tap 2 mana for Jamoka's Command, choosing the modes target player sacrifices an enchantment, and target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. I choose to sacrifice the Sylvan Library, and choose Emrakul to fight Gisela. I then cast a Recruiter of the Guard and fail to find. I then cast a Sacred Foundry, untapped, dealing 2 damage, but forget to deduct it from the life total. I pay 1 mana to activate Sensei's Divining Top, looking at the top 3 cards of his library. I tap the Sensei's Top to draw a card and put the top back on top of the deck. With nothing else, I just tap the rest of his mana and hand the turn back to Matt. Matt, knowing what's on top of his library, casts the top and pays 1 mana to look at the top 3 cards. He then taps it to draw a card. He quickly taps 6 mana and plays Aurelia, the War Leader, which will give him an extra attack phase. Matt plays a Plateau as his land for turn. Matt pays to equip Recruiter of the Guard with the Sword of Feast and Famine. He moves into combat and attacks me with everything. I choose to block Samut with my Emrakul. Taking 7 damage. Matt then untaps all his lands due to the Sword of Feast and Famine. He recasts his commander and moves into his second combat phase. He attacks me with all his creatures, and I choose to help Jose by blocking and killing Aurelia with Emrakul on my way out. Matt once again gets to untap all his lands and taps 3 mana for a Somberwalled Sage. Jose starts his turn off by not paying the upkeep cost for the Glacial Chasm, allowing him to attack freely now. He moves into combat, seeing that Matt doesn't have any flyers, and attacks Matt with Akim and the Aven Windguide. Before damage, he pays 4 mana to give Akim double strike with the Sunhome Fortress, dealing 8 damage to Matt and knocking him out of the game. Congratulations to Jose. Although his token strategy didn't pan out the way he wanted it to, he was able to survive due to the Glacial Chasm. This allowed him to hang back while his opponents knocked each other out. This was Jeff's first time piloting a Kozilek deck, and boy did he have fun. Ramping out a Ulamog on turn 5 and a Kozilek on turn 6 is no laughing matter. He was a threat the entire game. Unfortunately, he overextended himself and left himself open to an alpha strike from Matt. All in all, he had a great showing with the deck. My Yennet deck did what it was supposed to do early on in the game. Casting my commander on turn 3 and attacking with her on turn 4 is exactly what I want to do. But in the end, it was my misplays that got the better of me. If I just would have attacked Matt with Emrakul, I could have killed him on his own turn with his own Sylvan Library. And my second mistake was playing Recruiter of the Guard before putting the Sensei's top back on top of his deck and shuffling it away. Those costly mistakes definitely lost the game for me. This game really showed how skillful and resilient Matt is when it comes to Commander. He was picked on the entire game, having nearly half his deck exiled, and one of his turns taken didn't seem to trip him up too much. Even after all that, he was always a threat and nearly won the game. We'd like to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and follow us on our social medias. We also live stream on Twitch every Friday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.